All right, so let's dive into this whole Mel's Hole thing. It's this story about a supposed bottomless pit out in Washington State. It's, been kind of a mystery for years. People debate whether it's real or not.
Yeah, exactly. It first caught people's attention back in the 90s. There was this guy named Mel Waters, and he called into this late-night radio show, Coast to Coast AM, the one hosted by Art Bell.
Oh, yeah, I remember this show.
Well, Waters went on and on about this pit he found on his property near Ellensburg, Washington. Said it was like a void going down forever, basically.
So, how deep are we talking?
Well, according to Waters, he tried to measure it, just to see how deep it went. He used fishing line with a weight attached. Said he let out over 80,000 feet of line and still never hit bottom.
80,000 feet. Wait, that can't be right.
It's
way deeper than any caves we know of, right? Even deeper than that, what's it called? The Kola Super Deep Borehole. No. The deepest hole humans have ever dug.
Yeah. That's the one. And that's kind of where the science starts to fall apart. From a geological perspective, a hole that deep just wouldn't be possible,
Yeah. Wouldn't all that pressure and heat from the surrounding earth just make it collapse?
You got it. Jack Powell, a geologist with the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, has said it pretty plainly, something like Mel's Hole just can't exist.
Okay, but let's, for a second, just put that aside. What about all the weird stuff Waters talked about, like how animals, his dogs, wouldn't even go near the hole?
Right, and then there's all the strange things he said happen around it, too.
Like what?
Well, there was that story about him lowering a bucket of ice down into the hole. Said when he pulled it back up, it was warm, but still solid. And get this, somehow flammable, too.
What? Flammable ice?
That's what he claimed. And it gets even stranger. He even said that if you were near the hole with a radio, it would pick up these old-time broadcasts.
Oh, wow. Like it was messing with time or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And wasn't there something about his neighbor's dog? Like it died and they threw it in the hole and then...
Yep. Waters claimed they saw it running around later, totally fine, like nothing happened.
Creepy. That's some real horror movie stuff right there.
Oh, and it gets weirder. Waters claimed that if you held metal objects near the opening of the hole, they'd transform into other stuff, like change into different metals or even turn into something completely different.
That's wild. It's like the whole story just gets more and more unbelievable.
But that's what makes it so fascinating to people, right? It just goes against everything we think we know.
But the story doesn't end there, does it? Waters went on to make even crazier claims later on.
Oh, yeah. It gets wilder. He said the government got involved. Supposedly took over his land.
Seriously, what for?
Well, he said they paid him a ton of money to move to Australia.
Okay, and then what?
Then he claims that when he came back to the U.S., they kidnapped him.
Kidnapped him? Like the U.S. government?
That's his story. He said he woke up in some alley in San Francisco missing his teeth and with IV marks on his arms.
Oh, come on. That's a bit much, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, as time went on, his stories got pretty outlandish. Even some of the people who initially believed him started having doubts.
But by then, the story had already spread, right? Like it had taken on a life of its own.
Absolutely. It became this whole cultural phenomenon. You started seeing articles about it, podcasts, even documentaries. There was even an art exhibit about Mel's Hole at one point.
And I bet there are still people out there looking for it, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. Some are just curious. Some are into all the paranormal stuff. And some, I think, just love a good mystery.
Well, there was that one guy, what's his name? Red Elk.
Yeah, Gerald Osborne, that's his real name. He calls himself Red Elk, claims to be some kind of intertribal medicine man.
Right, him. He claimed he'd been going to Mel's Hole since he was a kid.
Yeah, and that it's actually some kind of secret underground base for UFOs.
So has anyone actually found this hole? Like, for real?
Nope. All the searching, and so far, nothing. To make things even stranger, a historian at the Ellensburg Public Library said their entire file on Mel's Hole disappeared right after Waters' first radio appearances.
So it's like the mystery itself is trying to stay hidden.
It kind of feels that way, doesn't it?
But I mean, all this skepticism aside, the story still has a hold on people,
Oh, yeah. Mel's Hole really speaks to that part of us that just loves the unknown, the unexplained.
But let's be real, from a scientific standpoint, a bottomless pit like Waters described just can't exist.
I mean, it just goes against everything we know about how the Earth works.
So most likely, Mel's Hole is nothing more than a really good story, right?
Probably. An elaborate hoax that just kind of got out of hand and turned into this modern myth.
But even if it isn't real, the story itself is still pretty captivating, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think it tells us a lot about human nature. about how we crave the extraordinary and how easily we can be drawn in by a good story, even when we know it might not be true.
So I guess what we're really diving into here is the mystery itself.
Exactly. We're going to look at the claims Waters made, what evidence there is or isn't, and how this whole thing has impacted culture. It's a wild ride. This whole idea that Mel's Hole could bring dead animals back to life, that's one of the things that really sticks with people.
I know, right? It's kind of creepy, but also fascinating.
Definitely. You remember that story Waters told about his neighbor, the one who supposedly threw their dead dog in the hole?
Yeah, and then they saw it later, alive and well.
It's almost like a modern-day myth or something, like it plays on our deep-seated fears and fascinations with death.
Totally. Makes you wonder, even if the whole Mel's Hole thing is a hoax, why that specific detail is so, I don't know, so powerful.
For sure. The idea of being able to cheat death has always been a big theme across cultures throughout history.
Another thing Waters talked about was how the hole would affect objects.
Right, like the metals. He said they would go through these weird transformations.
Transform how?
He described them changing into different kinds of metal, or even becoming something totally different, like not even metal anymore.
So like alchemy, almost.
Kind of, yeah. It's like he was saying that the normal rules of physics just don't apply at Mel's Hole.
Which I guess kind of goes along with the whole time distortion thing too.
Yeah, with the radios picking up those old broadcasts near the hole.
Like some kind of window into the past.
Exactly.
And then there's that whole thing about animals avoiding the hole.
Right. Waters said his dogs wouldn't go anywhere near it.
Makes you think maybe animals can sense something we can't, right?
Maybe. Some people have suggested that Mel's Hole might be giving off infrasound.
Infrasound.
Yeah, those sounds that are like too low for us to hear, but they can affect animals and even humans in some cases.
So maybe the animals were sensing something coming from the hole, something that made them feel uneasy.
Could be.
And didn't Waters also say that the hole seemed to, like, swallow things up without a trace?
Yeah, he claimed people used it as a dumping ground for years, but it never filled up.
And that when you threw stuff in, you couldn't even hear it hit the bottom.
Which, of course, has led to some pretty wild theories.
Like what?
Well, some say it's a portal to another place or even another dimension. Some have even said it's a black hole.
A black hole on Earth.
I know, right? This sounds crazy. But it's a powerful image, isn't it? This idea of something so dense that it just sucks everything in.
Yeah, that's definitely out there.
Well, I mean, from a scientific standpoint, it's pretty much impossible. Black holes are formed from collapsed stars, or they're massive.
Right. But still, it's fun to think about.
Absolutely. The whole Mel's Hole story is full of these details that just challenge what we think we know.
It makes you question everything.
Exactly. It taps into our sense of wonder, our fascination with what's out there, what's possible.
But it's also a good reminder that we got to be careful about what we believe, right? We need to look at the evidence, use critical thinking.
Absolutely. That's really important. Mel's Hole is a great example of how a story, even if it's not true, can really capture people's imagination.
And how it can stay with them for years.
Exactly.
But I mean, we have to address the elephant in the room, right?
Yes.
Not everyone buys into the Mel's Hole story. There are a lot of skeptics out there.
Oh, for sure. And they have some good points, too. I mean, it's important to be critical, right?
Totally. So let's switch gears a little and look at why some people think Mel's Hole is a hoax. We'll dive into the science behind it, the lack of evidence, and all that.
For all the searching that's been done, no one's actually been able to find this Mel's Hole. Like, its location, no one can say for sure, hey, it's right here.
Yeah, that's kind of weird, right? I mean, you'd think with all the technology we have now, GPS, satellites, finding a hole that's supposed to be 9 feet across wouldn't be so hard.
You'd think so, right? And we're not talking about some remote jungle here. Ellensburg's a pretty normal place, roads, towns, all that.
So no pictures, no videos, nothing. That seems suspicious.
It does raise some red flags, yeah. And then there's the whole thing about Mel Waters himself. Like, can we even confirm he existed?
What do you mean?
Well, when people looked into property records in Catitas County, where the hole's supposed to be, there's no record of anyone named Mel Waters owning land there.
Interesting. And what about the government taking his land? Any record of that?
Nope, nothing. And Waters made it sound like a pretty big deal, right? You'd think there'd be something somewhere.
So no paper trail for Mel Waters, no proof of the government being involved. It's starting to sound like maybe this whole thing was made up.
Yeah, the lack of any official records definitely makes you wonder. And then there's the science of it all. Like, Could a bottomless pit even exist?
That's what I was thinking. Isn't the Earth like layers of rock and stuff?
Yeah.
And then super hot stuff further down?
Exactly. You've got the Earth's crust, which is made of rock, and then below that is the mantle. It's incredibly hot and under a huge amount of pressure.
Okay, so let's say you could dig a hole that went down thousands and thousands of feet. You'd hit that hot stuff eventually, right?
For sure. And the deeper you go, the hotter and the more pressure there is. It's not a friendly environment.
So what would happen to the hole?
It would become unstable, basically. All that heat and pressure would cause the walls to collapse inwards.
So a bottomless pit just wouldn't work. The Earth itself would stop it.
Pretty much, yeah. Most geologists agree that the laws of physics just don't allow for something like Mills Hole to exist.
Okay, but what if it's not bottomless, just super, super deep?
Even then, 80,000 feet. That's what Waters claimed. That's still way beyond anything we've ever seen.
I mean, there are deep caves and stuff, right?
There are, yeah. The deepest known cave in the world is the Veriafkina Cave. It's in the country of Georgia. It goes down about 7,257 feet.
Okay, that's pretty deep.
And the deepest hole humans have ever dug, the Kola Super Deep Borehole in Russia, that goes down about 40,230 feet.
Still pretty impressive, but nowhere near 80,000 feet.
Nowhere close. So even if Mills Hole is just really, really deep, it's still pushing the limits of what we know about geology.
So we've got the lack of evidence, the science that says it can't exist, but people are still drawn to this story. It's like an urban legend, right?
That's exactly what it is. It's become this modern myth. I think it speaks to our fascination with things we don't understand.
It's like in a world where everything seems explained, Mills Hole is this little pocket of mystery.
I think that's a big part of it, yeah. It reminds us that there might still be things out there that we just don't get, things that defy our logic.
And there's that whole conspiracy theory angle too.
Oh, yeah. The idea that the government knows something they're not telling us, Waters' claims about being paid off and kidnapped, they feed right into that.
And you know, Mills Hole first came out when those kinds of ideas were really popular. Like the X-Files was huge, and that radio show Waters called into, Coast to Coast AM, they talked about this stuff all the time.
Right, so Mills Hole kind of tapped into that cultural moment. But even now, years later, people are still talking about it, sharing it online, making podcasts about it.
It's like the legend has taken on a life of its own.
For sure. Whether people believe it or not, it's become a part of our culture, something we share and debate.
So maybe Mills Hole isn't about an actual hole in the ground. Maybe it's more about us, about how we see the world.
I think you're right. It shows how much we crave mystery, how easily we can be captivated by a good story, even if it's probably not true.
And in a world that can sometimes feel a little too ordinary, I think that's kind of a beautiful thing.
It is. It reminds us to stay curious, to keep exploring, to keep asking questions.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Mills Hole. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep wondering what's out there. There's always more to discover.